No, but it's not a hearing, so with hearing issues for some folks, this might be helpful.
Can I close the windows and turn the fans on?
Sure, thank you, Beth. So, the Episcopal Church put out an LGBT inclusion guide, and so anyone who would like a copy of that, let me know. I'm happy to share it on behalf of the Episcopal Church. Deacon Beckett is also the director of Holy Hikes, which is an Episcopal Church thing. It's very cool. Beckett led, that does help. Thank you, Deb. Deacon Beckett and Beckett's partner Kay led a holy hike yesterday in Nuevo with 20 people, 3 dogs, and no crises until Deacon fell and broke a toe.
Anyway, it's just bruised.
So Deacon Beckett is the first openly transgender person to be ordained in the Episcopal Church in the state of Michigan. I am so proud of that. He studied religious studies, history, and Spanish at the University of Mississippi and is a 2019 graduate of the Academy for Vocational Leadership, from which he earned a certificate in Anglican Studies. And this is Deacon Beckett's word. When Deacon Beckett is not up to holy shenanigans, he enjoys gardening, playing video games, creating fiber art, and of course hiking. And Beckett and Kay and their child, 5-year-old Audrey, live in Port Huron. So welcome, Deacon Beckett. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me at this level? Good? No? All right. How about now?
Yes.
Okay. I was a theater kid. I'm a failed theater kid, actually. Luckily I can throw my voice against the back of the wall. So before we start, I just want to get a gauge of the room. So I'm going to ask questions. Raise your hand if this applies to you. Raise your hand if you're Episcopalian. Okay. Christian? Okay.
Hey, Episcopalians are Christian, so.
Just trying to see where my mainliners are. Raise your hand if you are a member of the LGBTQ community. Okay. Raise your hand if you have an immediate member of your family who is part of the LGBTQ community. Okay. Raise your hand if you have ever knowingly shared a meal with someone who is part of the LGBTQ community. Okay. So, as a quick popcorn, I want to make sure I've got a gauge of what y'all are expecting. Because I am here to serve you and what you need. I might have lots of notes about what I think y'all need to hear, but I want to know what you need to hear. So, what do you want? What would be helpful for you in knowing how to be an ally? Is there a burning question you have? Yes?
Definitions.
Definitions. Okay, that's a little bit more LGBTQ 101. I will disambiguate as I go. Other questions?
As we go forward in creating allies and allyship and reaching out, outreach, how to help everybody listen to each other and be comfortable and safe if we are trying to get youth to come forward, like that. Okay. Kind of like what we spoke about a little bit earlier.
Others? Yes.
As I was promoting this event, I spread the word among many churches in our community, and I got hate mail back from 2. How do you respond to Christians who say that we are not following the Bible by loving everybody, no exceptions?
Okay, we'll get on that. Anybody else?
This is just a more variety thing. How do you think we can get the community to change into a more what's it called? Inclusive? No, it's more eco-friendly, more changing into like getting your own rainwater or
More sustainable.
more sustainable. Yeah, that's what
how to make LGBTQ people we meet feel welcome off the bat, like the avoiding saying the wrong thing upon introduction.
Gotcha. Anybody else?
Just all of it, because I've been reading about you wear a T-shirt that says you're an ally and you're virtue signaling, and you're not really being an ally. And I'm like, how? Then what do you do? You know, how do you? I just think I need to know a lot more about how to do it. How to take the desire to be an ally and really make it happen.
Cool. Anybody else? Yes.
Maybe how hard to push on, my son is gay, doesn't talk about it at all, and I don't know how much I should be like, should I wait for him to bring up his issues, or do I just ask him the questions, or I want to do the right thing?
Okay. Yes.
Backing up on our virtue signaling thing, why is virtue signaling even a thing?
Okay. Yep.
There's pluses and minuses to both, right?
We will absolutely talk about that. Anybody else? Okay, so we've asked for some definitions. I'm going to start with some quick definitions. First and foremost, the LGBTQ plus, what's that all about? Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning. And then there's others like the I and the A that can be intersex. A can be asexual or agender. And then the plus is for all those other identities that could broadly be called queer identities, which don't neatly fall into definitions, or we don't have good words for them, or frankly, it's just too darn many letters. That is one of our challenges, is that because we're largely defined by our exclusion from the norm, it means that in order to be inclusive of one another, we have to add more letters onto our community name. So for most of this conversation, I'm going to use either LGBTQ or I'm going to use queer. Understand that my use of the word queer is because I'm part of that community, and I'm part of a generation where that word was not as often used as a slur, and we've been trying to reclaim it for ourselves, largely as a way of self-identifying without all of the individual labels. Because often, those labels, we may carry more than one. So saying, for instance, that I'm a transgender man says nothing about my sexuality, but my sexuality is also a part of my marginalization. Marginalization just means that I do not have the same social privilege by dint of my identity as others do. So, if I were to say, hi, my name is Beckett, my pronouns are he, him, I am a queer, transgender man who may or may not be bisexual, I don't know, it's weird. That's a lot to have to say, and then to have to explain, so I just say I'm queer. And it's good. So understand though that if you are not part of that community, saying that word could be a thing that signals that you are not a safe person. So one of the themes that I want you to take away from this workshop is that everything is relational. Everything is relational. It's all about relationships. And so part of navigating relationships is navigating expectations with one another. A good marriage is founded on good communication and clear expectations for one another. So it's the same thing with every other relationship. If you have clear expectations for what you expect from one another, and you have good lines of communication, then you're generally going to have a good relationship. Doesn't mean that you're not going to disagree. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have conflict. But it does mean that you have the base tools to be able to navigate that relationship in a healthy way. And ultimately, being a good ally is all about being in good relationship, not just with members of marginalized communities, but also with members of dominant communities. communities, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. An ally is just someone who provides help or support. In a social justice sense, that means that you are not a member of a marginalized community and you are providing support to that marginalized community. Examples include being a white person who participated in the Black Civil Rights Movement, being a man who supported women's enfranchisement, being a non-Indigenous person who supports tribal sovereignty over their lands. Those are all examples of ways of being an ally. The way that we're looking at it, the lens we're looking at it through today, is being an ally to the LGBTQ community. Those of you who were here for my sermon heard me talk about how being an ally is kind of redundant if you're a Christian, at least it should be, because if you're really embodying those like theological virtues of like faith, hope, love, and then the gifts of the Spirit of like love, joy, generosity, that whole list I gave y'all earlier that St. Paul writes about, then this kind of work is going to come a little bit more naturally to you. That doesn't mean that you don't need more information to be able to do it well, which is why we're here. An ally is not someone who is merely neutral or passively accepting. Folks in the LGBTQ community often run into this with family, where our family will say, well, I love you, I support you, I think you're fine. But then we'll go and support institutions that actively work to harm us. Go and engage in media which actively harms us or is written by people who profit from that media who then encourage the harming of us. A really good example of that is the Harry Potter series. I'm a millennial, I grew up with Harry Potter, I loved Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling is actively anti-transgender and uses her platform and her money to support the oppression of transgender people in Britain and worldwide. And that is harmful to people like me. So even though I loved Harry Potter, it was a big part of my childhood, we're not introducing Harry Potter to our child, and we're actively not engaging with that intellectual property anymore. Because we know that even if Joanne does not get the money from the plushie that we bought, that buying that plushie signals to toy companies that this is still a profitable intellectual property. So we don't even touch it. Don't deal with it, nothing. Because for us, what?
Just use a spin-off.
Well, yeah, Percy Jackson is great. We're, big Tolkienites. So there's other intellectual property that we can engage in that fills that niche for us. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's more comfortable for us to just not engage at all, even the spin-offs. Because even the spin-off goes back to the original IP. So, being neutral in the face of oppression means that essentially you're not doing anything to fight the oppression, right? If you're in the Jim Crow South and you're not actively trying to change those laws and those circumstances, then you're contributing to the continuation of those laws and circumstances. So sometimes being an ally means standing up against the thing, which is hard and it's scary. We're going to talk more about that. Passively accepting marginalized people without making an effort to be an ally often leads to relational missteps. I've got some aunts, for instance, who say that they love me, say that they affirm me, say that they're totally cool with me being transgender, will not use my name. Will only use the name that was given to me at birth, which does not align with my gender, and it's not an identity I carry anymore. That doesn't mean that it's not a part of me that's important, but that is too far of a step for them. But in so doing, every time I go to spend time with them, I know that I'm going to take that psychic damage the whole time of hearing a name that isn't my name. And soon isn't even going to be my legal name. So, whether they mean to or not, that choice to not use my name hurts me. And it hurts our relationship. So they may say that they love me, and they may believe that they love me. But that decision impacts our relationship, and it means that I feel like I can't trust them the way I might otherwise. It also can lead to reinforcing systems of oppression. If you encounter a queer couple who are becoming parents, and you assume that the one who was assigned male at birth is going to fill father roles, and the one who was assigned female at birth is going to fill mother roles, that's going to signal to them that you're putting them in a position of their assigned gender at birth. So that in itself can help to increase that level of oppression. Another example is being colorblind. You may believe that you're treating someone individually with courtesy and respect, but it does nothing to address the systemic racial inequalities. It may mean that you inadvertently do or say things out of ignorance that make people of color less likely to trust you. So should we as Christians seek to be allies? Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes, because. If you're Episcopalian, it's in our baptismal covenant. You made this promise, or someone made this promise on your behalf to, fabulous. I love it. That is the best ringtone. I love it. So, our baptismal covenant says, will you proclaim by word and example the good news of Jesus Christ? And your response is, I will, with God's help. Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? I will, with God's help. Will you strive, work hard for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? I will, with God's help. So if you're Episcopalian, that's literally part of your baptismal identity. Might be a hard part of your baptismal identity to live into. I know it's hard for me, but that's part of the promise that you've made to God, or that was made on your behalf, and you can grow into that. If you're just a Christian, greatest commandments are what?
Love God. Love your neighbor.
Yes. And on this hang all the law and the prophets. All of the law hangs on love God, love neighbor. Now, one of the things that you'll encounter with folks who aren't affirming is they'll say, well, the first one is love God, and God said that X, Y, or Z is wrong. Did God say that? Depends on how you frame the Bible. And that's one of the key differences between a lot of affirming churches and unaffirming churches, is the way that we frame the Bible. That doesn't mean that we don't take the Bible seriously. It means that we frame it differently. We understand it a little differently. We take it very, very seriously. We take those commandments to love our neighbors so seriously because we believe that every single human being is a representation of God. So if we are not loving our neighbor, if we're not being kind to them, if we're not respecting their dignity, then we are not in fact loving God. And we are not in fact respecting the dignity of God. Solidarity with the oppressed is a long-standing Christian tradition. Whether we're talking about the freedom riders, abolitionists, pacifists, whether we're talking about opponents of brutality, whether we're talking about For instance, St. Francis. We all love St. Francis, patron saint of animals and pets, right? But also someone who passionately cared for the poor to the extent that he laid down his privilege as the son of a rich merchant to live in poverty with the poor and to serve them. He literally took off his clothes in public, his really expensive clothes, because he would rather be naked than to continue to wear the super expensive clothing that he got from his rich dad, because he was so aligning himself with the poor. So we have all of these examples throughout the history of the church, throughout the Bible, of folks choosing solidarity with the oppressed and with the poor over their own privilege, and God smiling on that. So, how to be an LGBTQ ally? I've identified 4 stages. Familiarity, basic knowledge, relationships, advocacy and support, and solidarity. Familiarity comes down to building your knowledge about the LGBTQ community, the challenges that we face, and how you can help. So, read a book, listen to a podcast, engage in LGBTQ media, take a class, attend a workshop.
Join the Men's Area Pride Network.
Yes! That's all part of how you do it, is first you have to start with foundational knowledge. To know that a transgender person is different from a cisgender person in this way. To know what all of those letters mean. To have a basic understanding of the actual lives that we live and the actual things that we face, rather than just what you've been told by other people who may or may not have that community's best interests at heart. As a transgender person, one of the things that I encounter a whole lot is flagrant misinformation about our medical care and the steps that it takes to access that care, the barriers to that care that already exist. If you took some media to heart, you would think that they were handing out testosterone on every corner. They are super not. You would think that, I'll get to you in just a minute. You would think that children's parents can just take them to the doctor and say, this should be a boy, fix it. And that they'll just do it. They don't. There's medical guidelines that actually mean that the vast majority of transgender youth cannot access hormone replacement therapy, let alone surgery, until they are an age of majority. And in order to access those surgeries, you have to have been socially transitioned for a certain amount of time. You have to have been on hormone replacement therapy for a certain amount of time. You have to go before not 1, but 2 separate psychiatrists who will sign off on you having access to that medical care. It is a huge endeavor, and that has nothing to do with the cost. And depending on the amount of economic privilege you have, that cost can be mighty. I have a friend who is working on raising money for his top surgery, and because he's going to need to take time off work because he has a physically demanding job, he's going to have to raise $10,000 because he's going to have to take at least 2 months off work. He's going to have to pay for almost the entire surgery out of pocket, and he's going to have other incidental costs that he needs to make sure are covered. And 10 grand is not an unreasonable number for a self-funded top surgery if you don't have insurance and you work a job where you don't have paid time off. So understanding that there are all these barriers to that kind of access is part of that familiarity, means that you're less likely to be duped by people saying that we're mutilating children and stuff like that, because it just doesn't happen. But if you don't know folks from that community, you haven't taken the effort to understand what our lives are actually like and what our healthcare is actually like, then sure, this person I trust told me that this is what happened, so this must be the truth. So it's really, really important that you make sure that you're not just getting your information from cisgender people and straight people, but you're actually learning from the community itself. Question.
Okay, I've heard that the surgeries and stuff that they do not only are funding a lot of money, like the companies are funding a lot of money from that type of community, but it also hurts the body. Is that true, or is that just misinformation?
Right, so hormone replacement therapy for adults does cause permanent changes to your body. But here's a fun fact about HRT. If you put someone who is cisgender on the hormones associated with the body type of the opposite gender, they'll start to suffer from depression. They may have psychotic breaks. They will have physical pain and discomfort, right? Transgender people experience that before they go on HRT. And going on those hormones actually alleviates those symptoms. Personally, I've been on HRT for 13 months now, and what I was going on HRT for was for my voice. I had a lot of dysphoria around my voice being so high. And I was not anticipating that one of the benefits that I had within my first dose, far before anyone could tell the difference in my voice, or before, body parts started shifting around and my jaw started thickening up, before any of that happened, the first symptom I had was that my anxiety level way down. I had generalized anxiety disorder before going on HRT, and we tried so many different medications, so many different therapies. What ultimately did it was going on HRT. I am so much more chill now. Kay will tell you. I am so much more chill now because I went on HRT. There are permanent effects. There are some things, my voice will never be as high as it was. Never. But take a transgender girl, for instance. The only kind of hormonal medication that's allowed for minors is hormone blockers to prevent testosterone from having an effect on the body. One of the things that testosterone does is it thickens your vocal cords, and it makes it really, really difficult for you to ever have a higher range in your voice. A transgender girl is assigned male at birth. Her body will naturally produce testosterone if you don't stop it. That means that permanent effects are happening on her body that cause a great deal of dysphoria, a great deal of distress, depression, anxiety, all those good things, not good things, and are going to mean that she's going to have to spend more money in the future to get corrective surgeries to fix some of the things that have happened to her body. And that she's never going to have a voice that sounds the way that her voice sounds in her mind. She can do a lot of vocal therapy, and a lot of transgender women can have wonderful, beautiful, lilting, high voices, but never to the extent that they would if they had never had those years and years of testosterone in their system. And that's an irreparable damage to them, right?
Right.
If your depression is so severe from your body not having the right hormones that you have suicidal ideation, you may make a really permanent decision. These therapies can be life-saving. And in my opinion, the best way to ensure that harm isn't done is to follow the best medical guidance that we have and to listen thoughtfully to what that person is actually experiencing and make the best decision for them. I can't fix the fact that we have a for-profit medical system, right?
Yeah.
That's a systemic thing I don't have control over. I would personally really love it if we didn't. I think it would make everybody's lives better. But the reality is that we live in a for-profit system, and of course, doctors need to be paid.
Right.
The companies that produce the medicine expect to make a profit. But testosterone is one of the cheapest medications that's out there. It's a generic. Same thing with estrogen. So it's not like it's a medication that has a really high profit margin.
I was just thinking that it was harming people that were changing their gender or whatever, or that were the same gender. I don't really know what was going on there. I just heard it somewhere.
Yeah, so one of the things that, because right now there's this big moral panic about transgender people, especially transgender kids, one of the things that is often trotted out is detransitioners, people who transition their gender and then for one reason or another detransition. The vast majority of detransitioners do so not because they discern that they are not actually the gender that they transition to, but because it is so unsafe to be transgender. And it is easier and safer for them in their social circumstance to detransition. Gender reassignment surgeries, whether that's top surgery or bottom surgery, actually have a lower regret rate than knee replacement surgeries.
Wow, I believe that.
I think it was less than 5% regret having those surgeries. And while I'm an N of 1 and anecdotal evidence is not the same as peer-reviewed, verified, quantitative and qualitative studies, I'll say that every single trans person I know who has had one of those surgeries that they discerned was right for them has been overjoyed and has felt so free and so liberated. Because it really does make a huge impact on the way that you move through the world. Imagine if you had a third arm over here all the time. That wasn't useful for anything. Didn't make your life better, but it was just there, so your clothes never fit right, and you were never comfortable, and your seatbelt had to be different, and maybe it was too wide, so going through doors was uncomfortable. It impacts all of those little things in your life, right? Imagine if there was a way to get that removed, and how liberating that would be for you. I don't have to get custom shirts anymore. I can buy my clothes off the rack. I don't have to wear this assistive device that holds my weird third arm down. I can use a regular seatbelt. Think about how liberating that would be. That's what top surgery is like for a lot of trans men. That's what bottom surgery is like for a lot of trans women. So, this isn't a debate on whether or not transgender medical care is good or bad. But part of why there's a lot of argument around it is because we're not centering the perspective of transgender people. And that comes around to the second way to be an ally, and that's relationships. And it is the biggest, most important way to be an ally. How are you a good friend? When you're a good friend, you're centering other people. You're being kind, you're being generous, you're opening your home to them. You're listening to them, not to respond, but to understand. You're sometimes making yourself uncomfortable and going out of your way to do a nice thing for them. You're sitting with them in the muck of life, whatever that muck is, but then you're also celebrating the good things that happen in their lives. So showing genuine curiosity about people's lives. We have so much more to our lives than being queer. If all you know about K is that K is what?
Non-binary.
Yes, if all you know about K is that K is non-binary, and K is just that person over there, they're non-binary. It's all you know about them, and you've never taken any interest in finding out anything else about them, You wouldn't know that, for instance, what is one of your favorite things to do all the time?
Play guitar. I've been playing for 16 years.
You wouldn't know that one of Kay's core identifying parts of their life is that they play guitar. Knowing that they play guitar and that's a core part of their life means that you can be like, hey, did you see that really, really cool cover of that one Dio song? What's that one Dio song?
Holy Diver.
Yeah. You know, can you do that?
Sometimes. If I remember all of it.
We're learning things about Kay that go beyond their gender identity, that go beyond their sexuality. And that's a big part of being a friend, right? You don't just think about Bob as being the white guy, you know. Why would you? There's so much more to Bob than the fact that he's a white guy. So just being a good friend and knowing more about someone and not just pigeonholing them is like a first step. There are major changes in our lives that are a little bit different, but not super different. Kay and I had our 5-year wedding anniversary last year. And part of that was acknowledging that we have different names that we use than what we used when we had our marriage vows. So the Episcopal Church has a rite of renaming, and we had a rite of renaming, and we renewed our vows with our new names. And that was something that we didn't initiate. Our good friends who ran the retreat that we were going to right around the time of our anniversary were the ones that initiated that. Because they knew that that was a big part of our lives and something that we were recognizing. And because we have different names and I have a different gender identity than I had when we got married, that was a way for them to celebrate that we're 5 years into this and Kay is still with me for some reason, I don't know. Other things to celebrate, legal name changes, document updates. It is a huge deal for a trans person when you get your corrected birth certificate. Oh, that's a big deal. Because that's the state recognizing this core part of your identity. That's huge. Celebrating that with people is amazing. Hormone replacement therapy effects are a great opportunity to celebrate the life of a trans person. I got a tank top at the Flint Pride event, and I was telling one of my friends about it. I was like, I like this tank top. And she was like, yeah, that's a real bro tank. In that moment, I went, yeah, it is. Heck yeah, I got a bro tank. That was her celebrating that with me. And recognizing that, in that moment, I was celebrating a garment I had that was affirming my gender identity. There are community observances that can be really helpful. If you are part of leadership of a church community, it may be a good idea to consider recognizing some of these, maybe having a liturgy around these days. Things like the Transgender Day of Visibility, which is March 31st. Fun fact, next year it's Easter. No pressure, guys. If there is an identity in that assortment of letters, there is a day of visibility or celebration for that. Guaranteed. It's a good idea to be present for Pride Month, to have a presence. There are some that will consider that virtue signaling. Here's the thing about virtue signaling. It is a way of publicly being visible. And in a context in which the vast majority of Christians are not publicly identifying as being affirming, that can be extremely helpful. There are definitely folks that will criticize it and call it virtual signaling. I try to think about what impact is this going to have on the people that I'm actually trying to communicate this to. For one of our churches in Western Michigan, I designed a free Church Lady Hugs shirt for their Pride. Because church ladies give great hugs, right? And also, if you're a queer kid who grew up in a church that didn't affirm you and you left the church, you've lost that community. And there are subtle things about being part of a faith community that even if you've decided that you don't believe in God anymore, you don't believe in any of that, having a church lady affirm you and offer you a hug is huge. So I made them a design for a free church lady shirt because I knew that that was something that if I were younger and not in the church would have been really helpful for me. Because I love church lady hugs. Transgender Day of Remembrance is a huge, highly important day in our community because transgender people experience extremely high levels of violence. Partner violence, random acts of community violence. A whole lot of us die by suicide because of social pressure to not live our lives. So the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is October 20th, is a day where we get together and we recognize the folks who did not make it. Transgender people have a lower than average life expectancy, not because of any outward effects or inward effects of our lifestyle, but because of the violence against us, including the violence that we end up inflicting upon ourselves out of self-hatred. So that's a really important day of recognition, and I'm always really encouraged when I see that churches are offering Transgender Day of Remembrance services. The Great Litany, hey, Episcopalians, the Great Litany is great for the Transgender Day of Remembrance because it's this ancient, desperate plea to God for help. And certainly it's a liturgical element that can help to give voice to that pain and to that lament. Being present with us means not just celebrating with us, but also lamenting with us. And also, how many of your churches celebrate Mother's Day or Father's Day, whether like in the service or like at coffee hour? A lot of ours do. There's Transgender Parent Day, which isn't just for transgender parents who may or may not identify as mother or father, but for the parents of transgender kids. And that is the first Sunday in November, so it doesn't interact with like any of the other parent days. And that's a good opportunity to celebrate families that may not look like other families and give them space. Because one of the things that is certainly part of the LGBTQ experience in churches is that our families don't get celebrated the way that cisgender and straight families do. So having a Transgender Parent Day is an opportunity to celebrate families that don't look like a lot of the other families in your community. If you have married, gay, or lesbian families that have children, recognize that the way that you celebrate Father's Day or Mother's Day may inadvertently marginalize one of those parents. Because the way that queer families navigate parenting doesn't fit neatly into gender roles, because if you've got two men, you've got two dads, what does being a pair of dads look like? What does being a pair of moms look like? It's much more individualized, so making those assumptions about those families can also be inadvertently painful. When violent events against the LGBTQ community occur, check in with your friends. I remember when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened in 2016? Yeah. That was a Saturday night thing. That was the first thing I read about on Sunday morning. Was friends from Florida saying that they were safe and that they hadn't been at that shooting. And I remember walking into church that morning and having this huge weight on my shoulders, this grief in my heart that, you know, I named during the prayers of the people, but no one checked in with me and was like, hey, saw on the news this thing happened, or that you asked for prayers for this event in this community. Are you okay? If they'd asked, I would have said, no, I'm not okay right now. I am scared. I I had a friend in I have a friend in Sanford, Florida, who's part of the LGBTQ community, and has been to the Pulse nightclub and could have been there. And the first thought I had when I saw that happened was, oh God, is she okay? And even for a few minutes thinking that my friend could have been shot down, having a good time on Saturday night with her friends, was a lot, and I was grieving. So recognizing that, violence is part of our lives, and check in with us. Please do not out people. I am okay with events like this, being identified as being the first transgender Episcopalian ordained in the state of Michigan. In a lot of other contexts, I'd really rather not have that be like a key part of the way that people introduce me. I'd rather just be able to be Deacon Beck. It's part of my life and part of my story, but it's not all of it. And in some communities, that's not safe. It's not necessarily a safe thing to be identifying me as, behold, transgender Beckett. People will figure out real quick that I don't fit into a box, right? But outing me may not be safe. Yes?
You're raising, I didn't mean to interrupt this.
Yeah.
But you're raising a question I've had around youth ministry.
Yes.
When it comes to kids who go by one name, the parents refer to them by another name.
Yeah.
Our youth protection is that I am not to meet with a kid one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also not to meet with a kid and their parent and out them in a way that's uncomfortable for them.
Yes. Yeah, that's really hard to navigate. Teachers have to do this a lot.
Yeah.
Especially with youth, parents can be a huge source of abuse and neglect and pain if they're trans or non-binary or just gay. I can't tell you a hard and fast rule for how to navigate that other than be very mindful of their safety.
Okay.
And in all youth ministry, our number one concern is making sure our kids are always safe, first and foremost. And that they know that they're loved and that they know they're supported. As a minister, regardless of whether that kid is safe at home, they need to know that you love them and that you accept them for who they are. If a transgender youth, if an LGBTQ youth has just one adult in their life who supports and affirms them, their statistical probability of attempting suicide goes down by 40%. 40%. Being that one adult can literally save a life. And all it takes is, you may not be one-on-one private in a room with a kid,
Right.
but being clear that you're an affirming adult and that you love every kid the way they are is a huge first step. And it comes back to relationships. Be aware of how LGBTQ plus folks live differently in the world because of anti-LGBTQ sentiment, or because of fundamental differences between us and cishet folks. Transgender people may not be comfortable in public spaces where gender-neutral restrooms or single-occupant restrooms are not available. That's part of my life. I do a lot of traveling all over the state for the work that I do. One of the things that I tend to do is Google where the next Starbucks is, because Starbucks always has single occupant, gender neutral restrooms. So I know if I plug Starbucks into Google Maps, whether I really want to support a union busting company or not, they are probably going to be a place where I can safely relieve myself of my burdens before getting back on the road. So being aware of that, if you're traveling with someone, that may be a concern that they have, is a good step. Knowing in your itinerary a place where there's going to be a gender-neutral restroom is extremely helpful. A lot of our churches in eastern and western Michigan, especially our up north ones, only have single-occupant restrooms. And for a long time, those restrooms still had genders on them for some stupid reason. And happily, we've been slowly changing our signage so that they say that they're gender neutral, which is extremely helpful. And it's not just helpful for trans folks. That makes the space more accessible to everybody because everybody knows that they can use that restroom. That restroom is occupied, and I'm a woman. I need to use that restroom. It says woman. I might feel some kind of way about going into the men's room. My mom doesn't. We've talked about it. But that may be a thing. Because you may not be able to tell by looking at the door that it's single occupant, right? So stuff like that. If you are in a position where you can help make those changes happen, that's a good way to make sure that folks are going to be safe. If you run events, and you're choosing where those events are going to be, checking to make sure what kinds of bathrooms they have is a good step. Be aware that queer families may not have a mom and a dad. My kid mostly uses my first name for me, because for a long, long time, I was Mama. Then Mama started feeling really weird. But I wasn't quite comfortable with Dad yet. So, hey kid, can you call me Beckett? So she does, she calls me Beckett, and other kids think it's really weird. But that's just our life. She's working on Dad, she's getting there. And we call me Dad. But Kay identifies as Papa, and that works for Kay. You could also just call Kay, hey you, and they'd be fine with it. Recognizing that in queer families, Mom and Mama may have different kinds of roles than in a straight family Mom would have, is helpful. So those are all parts of like navigating that relationship thing. Ultimately, it all comes down to focus on the fact that you love them, and you want the best for them, and you want their safety, and you want their health. And make sure that they know it. And make sure that if you make a mistake, because you will make a mistake probably, that you're prepared to be humble and honest with them, and that you're committed to doing better. Misgendering happens a lot. I know I'm talking a lot about trans stuff because, hi. Misgendering is a thing that's going to happen. You don't need to self-immolate over it. Just say, oh, right, sorry, correction, move on. And then, one of the ways that if you're having trouble with getting it right, you can correct that so it's less likely to happen in the moment, is to intentionally practice. When one of my two best friends from growing up came out as trans years and years back, I had a really, really hard time with his name for a while because his name and my name rhymed. And I had known him for so many years, since we were 9, by that name. And so I had to work really, really, really hard at addressing him by his name. So what I did was I very intentionally, with my mom, practiced, we're going to talk about Eli now. I want to tell you about this cool thing that Eli's doing. And then Eli. Didn't use a pronoun for the longest time, just Eli. So it was burned into my brain. He didn't know I was doing that, but that was a way that I really helped to reinforce that I wanted to get this right by practicing. And then once I had Eli down, then we worked on pronouns until we got it right. And we got there. And now, like, if I think about Eli, I don't even think about his birth name, even though we've known each other for so long. And like using a different pronoun for him would be really weird, because I've gotten so used to it. With any change, practice makes perfect. Moving on to advocacy and support. Join an organization. So that you can get together with other people that are affirming and are trying to do the work, whatever the work is in your community. Consider the media, businesses, politicians you support, whether they advocate against LGBTQ+ folks and our civil rights. When you spend your money with, or engage with these entities, you not only contribute to harm against those folks, you also communicate to those people that you're not safe. Going back to the Harry Potter reference, if I meet someone that otherwise is really down for the LGBTQ plus cause and should know contextually why Harry Potter is kind of a thing, and they're still engaging with it, that's a little bit of a red flag. I work through it. Like, if I know that their heart is in the right place, but if I don't know them very well, but I do know that they're in the LGBTQ plus community, and they're still wearing Harry Potter stuff, it's gonna give me pause. If someone's chomping on some Chick-fil-A, I'm gonna have a moment of, okay. Because part of how we navigate the world and stay safe is looking for those really subtle red flags. For a long time, Cracker Barrel was one of them. Cracker Barrel's getting a little bit better, but so for older queer folks, Cracker Barrel is one of those red flags. There's a whole bunch of them, and part of knowing those red flags is going back to the relationship and the familiarity, knowing that those are organizations that have been harmful and recognizing it. On the flip side, there's Subaru, right? Subaru made a point of advocating for LGBTQ plus inclusion and marketing to lesbians, which means that, like, for better or worse, driving a Subaru can be a little bit of a virtue signal. As an Episcopalian, we joke about the Episco Subaru phenomenon. Like, so many Episcopal clergy drive Subarus. This is totally an aside, but I was getting together with another clergy person in the Diocese of Western Michigan, and we were going to go on like a pre-hike for Holy Hikes. And I realized I didn't know what kind of car she drove, but I was there and I was waiting for her. I was like, I'm like, oh, how am I going to know that this is the person I'm getting together with? I can't see her face through the windshield. I'm sitting there, and I see this Subaru come up, clearly playing either NPR or an audiobook. And I was like, that's the one, right there. We're a little punk, we drive a Ford. Partly because we got the Ford before this happened. Someday I will get my Episco Subaru. Be willing to have hard conversations with other cisgender, that's folks who are the gender that they were assigned at birth, or heterosexual people, who may assume that nobody they're speaking up against is in the room, and that those perspectives are okay. Those are hard conversations, sometimes really hard conversations. It helps to couch them in terms of the relationship that you have with them. If you don't have much of a relationship with them, you can sometimes get away with being a little bit more direct and just saying that's not okay. Try not to out anybody when you do that. So if you have a transgender son, and that's a person that your child is not out to, it might not be good to say, my son is trans. You could say, I have folks in my family that I care very much about who are transgender, and what you're saying is wrong, and it's hurtful and harmful, and I will not tolerate you saying that. That can be good. Sometimes it helps to practice that stuff if you're a person who struggles to self-advocate. That can be a productive way, not just for that person to know that what they're doing isn't right, but so that the other people in the room know that you're a safe person. Because you don't know. You don't know if someone may have an identity that they are not yet out. I have people that I know and I love very, very much who are part of the LGBTQ community, and they are not out to their immediate family because they have heard so much vile stuff that they know that if they came out, it would be a problem. And so, even though those members of the family don't know that they're saying hurtful things in front of, in this case, a bisexual person, they are. And if there was another member of the family there who could say, hey, knock it off, that would tell that person, this person is someone that's safe. This is someone that I could come out to, that could be familial support. So sometimes doing that little stand-up is important. Sometimes you can do it in a humorous way. It depends on your relationship. And that's part of the weirdness, right? Because every situation, every relationship is different. But what's important is that you make it really, really clear that this is a community that you support their rights, and that you are trying really, really hard to love them and care about them. You may also be able to, I will get you, babe. You may also be more effective at getting through to someone if the two of you share an identity, if they know you well. An example that isn't LGBTQ related, but is related to Indigenous sovereignty. I was having a conversation once with a parishioner who was complaining about the Washington football team and the naming controversy about the Washington football team, and saying, I don't see why that's necessary, it doesn't affect anybody. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. You know my spouse is Indigenous, right? That means my child has an Indigenous grandmother. Do you think I should send my child to a school that has a racial slur for her grandmother as their mascot? Just asking that question made it finally click for her and changed her mind. But part of the reason why I was able to have that conversation was because we had something in common. We were both Episcopalians, we were in the same church, and she knew my child and recognized in that moment the impact that something like that would have. So sometimes you're better able to get through to people if you have a relationship with them, but that doesn't mean that you're going to have an uncomfortable conversation. Specifically couching your support of LGBTQ plus folks in your faith can be a really powerful rhetorical strategy, but be prepared to have your faith questioned, right? We talked about today's lectionary and how Paul said to not be conformed to the world. You will get that accusation, I guarantee it. I have gotten that accusation. Really important to remind folks what Paul meant by being conformed to the world. And what it means to be conformed to God and to Christ. And you may not see eye to eye. It may not happen. It could happen down the road. You planted that seed. You never know when someone is going to have a conversion of heart. And sometimes it takes a long time for them to have that conversion of heart. So all you can do is be present and be clear. And pray for them. And not in the like passive aggressive, like, oh baby, I'm praying for you. You don't even need to tell them. Because like we mess up. We occasionally often have convictions that we later come to realize are not actually as faithful to being a disciple of Christ as we may have thought it was. It takes a lot of humility to recognize that you're wrong. So asking someone to change their heart in that way is asking for a really, really big thing. So like it makes sense, right? That it's going to be hard for them, and they may not get there, and that's okay. But it is important in relationships to be very, very clear about where your boundaries are. And if one of your boundaries is, I will not tolerate you behaving or saying things that deny the dignity of other human beings, then they know that that is a boundary on your relationship with them. And that's a clear part of having a healthy relationship with them. And it may well be that you lose friends. Sorry. Queer folks lose friends all the time.
Friends and family.
And family. And sometimes that's, and church family, church communities. I will never have the same relationship with my hometown that I had as a child. I will never feel as safe in my community that I grew up in as I did before I hit puberty, and suddenly everything's got really weird. And I don't know if reconciliation is possible. For my safety, I don't think I really want to pursue that reconciliation. It's not as important to me as finding another community where I am safe. But reconciliation can be possible if everyone is committed to it. And that's the other thing. That community has to be equally committed to reconciliation with me as I am to it. As far as support goes, donate to organizations that provide education, advocacy services, etc. for the LGBTQ community. Examples, the Trevor Project, the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, GLAD, PFLAG, Behold, all organizations that you can support financially if you have the privilege of wealth. If you have the privilege of wealth, consider donating to fundraisers that benefit LGBTQ plus folks directly. Transgender medical care can be extremely expensive. LGBTQ plus folks, especially youth, are more likely to have housing insecurity as something that they experience, job insecurity. Michigan recently, very recently, too recently, included gender identity and sexual orientation in non-discrimination policies for work. But that doesn't apply to, say, religious institutions, which includes a lot of our hospital systems. So those are ways in which LGBTQ plus folks experience insecurity that impacts them financially. And being aware of that and helping to donate to help to offset that so that they can get back on their feet is a good way of being a good ally. And if you see a GoFundMe for someone's surgery, that is a really, really good thing to donate to. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you will see that I repost other people's surgery GoFundMes all the time. A thing to know about GoFundMe is that they only release the funds after they're fully funded. So if they're like $100 away from clearing that, your $100 could be the difference between them getting all of that money or none of that money. So, consider how you may be able to leverage your privilege, whatever that is. Do you sit on a board? Are you in a hiring position? Are you someone who has influence in a club or an organization or a part of the community? Are you the matriarch or patriarch of your family? Privileges like that can be used to support people who don't have that privilege. That also includes passing the mic. Susan provided me with a little instrument of privilege by passing the mic to me and inviting me to come speak. All of your opportunities for alliance will vary based on your position and your privileges. Okay, you have something.
Yeah. So I had some real life examples of the whole setting boundaries with people. I work in manufacturing, and it's a very white, male-dominated company, especially in management. And I frequently am in spaces where, as I task for a white person, a white man, I hear things that when other white men are in safe spaces would not be considered appropriate for Comedy Central at 2 in the morning. And
let alone at work.
Yes, let alone at a place of business. And so I can take those moments to out myself when sometimes I have, where I feel comfortable, I'm not going to get any serious repercussion for this, I feel safe saying, actually, I am in a queer relationship, I am non-binary, and these kinds of things. And you would be surprised how quickly people can either take that and realize, oh, I didn't even think that I could hurt somebody by just saying that, and work towards it. I worked with someone who has that kind of gruff mentality, and once I revealed that I have a husband and I do all of this work and my pronouns are they, because I have worked so close with them for over a year, I've actually helped them become more accepting and understanding of the queer community. So taking that time, even if it feels like you're having a confrontation, can lead to a stronger relationship with people who may have those ideas, and you can even help change them.
Yes.
So much of this is about fear and safety. And it's like, the things making LGBTQ people unsafe are the fears of the other.
Yes.
And so they are like, no, it was never around in my generation. They're recruiting. It's like, no, they were closeted. They were afraid. You know, it's, you know, this whole bathroom thing. I was like, my God, you've gone to the bathroom with trans people your whole life. You just didn't know.
Yeah.
So you weren't afraid. You know, but I don't know, because you're dealing with their fears for their safety and their fears for their safety, and how are you that? Everybody needs to be safe, so we have to stop this cycle of.
Yeah. Part of it is like, what do you think people are doing in the bathroom?
Yeah. Well, and some of it is that the familiarity.
Yeah.
I was afraid of Muslims till I got out of my little insular town and met some, and then they were just pretty cool people, and some of them, and it was like, okay, they're like there's
it's
one
wild.
Different thing about them.
It's wild how having a relationship with someone will humanize their entire demographic, right?
It's a huge thing, but then you get into that, my Muslim friend or my black friend, or but it's a huge thing. Exposure, which doesn't happen up here very much. Well, we don't know.
Yeah.
We're afraid of exposure.
Yeah.
I mean, we posted about a friend of our son's who was at our Thanksgiving dinner who was Muslim, and I got a text from somebody saying, "Aren't you afraid they'll be radicalizing your kids?" And I was like, well, no, not really.
Radicalizing your child to pray 5 times a day.
Yeah.
Would you do that as Christian? No.
Yeah, it's. But that was their first thought. Not how wonderful it was that we had this inclusive dinner table, but that, oh my God, watch out.
Yeah.
Danger. It's like,
Yeah. And a lot of, part of the reason why we were having a moral panic is because there are people who profit off of our fear and our panic.
which may be who calls us virtue signalers. I mean, I'm thinking about that and going, they're just throwing that at you to shut you up.
Yeah.
Versus.
And it's another opportunity to take your deep relationship that you have and to other it and to other you. A lot of the divisiveness is about objectifying people. So part of how we as Christians navigate the world is that we purposely do not objectify people. And it is hard. It is hard for me to be respectful and courteous to people who don't think I should have the right to relieve myself, right? But I can also recognize that changing your point of view is really, really hard, and that if you are soaking in fear and paranoia all the time, that is a psychic load. And I may not be able to convince them to turn off that damn television. But what I can do is offer courtesy, politeness, sit with them in their discomfort, whatever that is, while also maintaining a clear boundary of you will respect me. Because I'm a person who's worthy of respect. You will respect my brothers and my sisters and my siblings because they are worthy of dignity and respect. I'm not asking you to have a gay marriage if you're not gay. I am asking you to live and let live, and if someone wants to be gay and married, that is their business. As far as the state is concerned, marriage exists largely as a series of legal protections. And for someone to be in a relationship for 20, 30, 40 years and not have that legal protection is a problem. Whether or not your individual church affirms that is up to your individual church and your polity. And I can respect that that is your circus and your monkeys. My circus and my monkeys, in my tradition, we do affirm that, and that is okay. I think it's fabulous.
One of the things I think occurs, and it's difficult sometimes to get below the surface of where somebody's occurring, but it's often done by scapegoating because it serves for very particular reasons. It may be power, it may be economics, it may be social justification, political, whatever it is, it's a tool which is used, unfortunately, very destructive.
Yes. And the only way that we can circumvent that is by, in my opinion, being so clearly and fervently loving that the goodness of our cause is, it can't be denied. And that goes back to the relationship aspect. If you've built a good relationship with someone who has a different ideology around gender than you have, them knowing that you're still a good person, you would give them a shirt off your back, that you are loving, that you take the Bible seriously, that you take God seriously, that you would be there for any one of your neighbors any darn time. That's a really, really good way to get through to them. A lot of the reason why I say young people leave the church is because of hypocrisy, right? These people say one thing on Sunday morning and then go do another thing. So part of the way that all of us, regardless of our order, regardless of our social position, proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ is by being the good news. Yeah. So that gets us through to solidarity. That means being willing to make sacrifices, y'all. I have not had Chick-fil-A since I was 20 years old. I really love Chick-fil-A sauce. Those chicken tenders were mighty good, and there was a Chick-fil-A in the student union at Ole Miss, and oh man, that was really satisfying coming out of a long night shirt. You were hungry. But I made that decision that I could live without that. That not supporting that business is more important to me than the product that they were providing. And it ended up meaning that I learned how to cook chicken myself. And I found duplicate recipes for that sauce, because that sauce is good. You may lose friends if they're anti-LGBTQ+, and you are. Depending on the denomination you belong to, you may encounter pushback from your faith community. You'll definitely encounter pushback from other Christians. You may encounter violence. Really, heart-wrenching example is out in California last weekend. A business owner had a pride flag in front of her place of business, and someone who had been radicalized, going back to radicalization, who had been radicalized to be anti-LGBTQ and who had access to a gun, shot her, killed her. She was not part of the LGBTQ community, but it was important to her to be an ally and to be visibly so, and to have signs and symbols that her establishment was a safe place, And she suffered the ultimate cost for it. And that's just a reality. And that takes courage and it takes conviction. And I'm not going to tell you to do unsafe things because I don't want you to be hurt, right? But it is part of like your own personal analysis of, is this important enough to me? And if it is, we're Christians. We take up our crosses, whatever they may be. And understand that solidarity with the oppressed is a core Christian virtue. Any suffering that you encounter as a result of your solidarity with the LGBTQ community is still less than what the queer community experiences just living our lives. A common trope in our community, especially online, is saying, I just want to live, but you just let me live. That's all I want. Let me do my thing. That's all we want. And the fact that we can't, that's pretty big. None of these stages, these 4 stages, are linear. They're cyclical, they feed on each other. Being a good friend to an individual is not on its own being an ally, but neither does simply donating annually to the Trevor Project. It's a continual process, just like being a disciple of Christ. It's a process. You orient yourself the best you can. You make a practice of it. You're gonna mess up. You're gonna mess up and you're gonna have to go back, learn more, work on that relationship, whatever that relationship is, work on your advocacy. When you know better, you do better. Just keep moving forward, because if you've identified that this is a way that you want to identify yourself, you want this to be part of you, it doesn't happen overnight. You may be a baptized Christian, but it takes your whole life to really be a Christian. You're always practicing. We practice our faith. You practice allyship. And when you mess up, it doesn't make you a bad person. You're gonna mess up. We apologize. We move on. We strive, we work hard to do well. Sometimes you may need to make amends, right? Sometimes just saying sorry isn't enough. Sometimes just doing better isn't enough. Sometimes you have to say, hey, I really messed up. How can I make it right for you? Again, it's relationships, it's back and forth. Try when you make those mistakes not to center your feelings. You may have a lot of them, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of self-loathing involved. But try not to center your feelings in those apologies. It's a lifelong journey. So, I know that's a lot. I've been talking for a while. How are we doing? How do we feel? Okay. Did we touch on everything we'd hoped to? Does anybody have any questions, things that have stirred up? Words I kept saying that you're like, what the heck?
I love that you asked that.
Yes.
One of the things when you're talking about relationships, and a lot of times, like the community itself is fearful.
Mm-hmm.
The community who wants to know doesn't know how to approach that fearful community because they're fearful of hurting that fearful community.
Yes.
Or exposing what they don't maybe want to be involved. They didn't want to talk about it. They want to know people are involved. It presents a problem itself. How do you get to step one as a community of people to be able to have a relationship with nothing more than the finding out and hearing over and over again? I know for you, it's part of your life. The definition is living. For us, it's not even knowing what to understand. And I think we, as a learning community and wanting to be a helping and be in relationship, has to have that foundation to be able to get there. We don't have that ability in this community enough because we do not have people who have that experience who are willing to feel safe enough
Mm-hmm.
to say, sure, I can help. How can I help you understand? So you can be a partner and a friend and a help to us. That's the tough thing, I think.
Yeah, so at an organizational level, a really, really great strategy is to reach out to other organizations that do advocacy, even if they're from outside of your immediate area. Examples include, so our bi-diocesan community had an LGBTQ 101 course for church leaders. And we reached out to Great Lakes Bay Pride to help us organize that training, because that's one of the services that organization offers. And so we organized this training in coordination with them. It was led entirely by folks from the LGBTQ community, both in our wider bi-diocesan community and in their organization. So it was centering folks from that community. And we had like 70 people come to that from all over Lower Michigan, including people that weren't even Episcopalian. We had some Methodists come party with us. That was fun. I love ecumenism. It makes me so happy. I can't pronounce that word. I always feel like I'm pronouncing it wrong. But you know, that's one of the ways that as an organization we can make that happen, is by reaching out to potential partners. Examples include other examples include Polestar up in Traverse City is a resource. If you reached out to Scott at Great Lakes Bay Pride, he would come in and help you out. I, as a deacon in the Episcopal Church, am always happy to do this work. So that's a resource. There are book resources for doing book studies that we can make recommendations of, and there's a huge resource list in the back of the resource guide from the diocese that we're happy to share. Does that help? On an individual level, humility is the number one thing.
And if I could speak to what we're doing in Benzie County, take a moment to plug us. We started the Benzie Area Pride Network earlier this year because we saw, this will not be outing her, most of you have already heard my spiel about my daughter. My daughter's transgender and lesbian, and she was not feeling supported in this community. She also worked with a lot of young people who were getting thrown out of the house because they came out, sleeping on couches, kids were homeless. And so, talking with other people here at St. Philip's, we decided to start this as a mission for the church. So we are affiliated with St. Philip's. We have a number of people who are advising, people who are in, part of the LGBT community, people who are allies like me. And when we had our first meeting in this room in May, we came up with 3 directions that we wanted to focus on. One is social, just giving people a chance to, as Beckett was saying, get to know each other, build those relationships, feel comfortable with one another. One is education, and so we are starting to work on educational programming. We've only taken baby steps there so far. Jessica is helping with our website, which will be up as part of the St. Philip's website, and we'll have a lot of resources listed there. Thank God for young people who know how to do that stuff. And then the third thing is visibility. And for that reason, we have our banner. We march in the 4th of July parades. We have a group of people who will be marching in the Up North Pride Parade at the end of September in Traverse City. So we are working on making this community more visible in Benzie County and showing people that it's not, these are not aliens. These are not little green people with. So, that there are people in this community that someone said, you've been going to the bathroom with them for years and you just didn't know it. They're here, everybody. So one of the things that I see on Facebook a lot and in the media sometimes is, be careful who you hate. It could be someone you love. That's good. Yeah. So we are working on visibility. We're working on the socials, making social opportunities for people, and we're working on education. If you are not already on my email list, I do an email about once a month with Pride Network stuff, and I forgot to bring my little sign-up sheet, but just make sure you give me a slip of paper with your email address. And or we have a Facebook page, and it's a private page. You have to ask to be admitted, and what I do, or the other admin does, is look at your Facebook stuff and make sure that you're not one of the haters. So it is a very safe place on our Facebook page, and I know Facebook is for old people, but it is what it is. So, thank you, Beckett. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, getting back to the humility part. I have a lot of friends who are clueless church ladies who don't know their cis from their hets, from their queers, from their trans. They don't know. And the ones that are the best, just kiss, are the ones that say, hey, are you comfortable with me asking you a question about X? To which I almost always say, yeah, I got the emotional energy for that. What's your question? And then they say, I've heard about this. Can you disambiguate that for me, please? And I'm happy to do so. Not everyone is happy to do so. For some people, that's a lot of emotional labor. I view like this right here as meaning that I have to be willing to educate whenever I'm called to. And I take that really seriously. So I try my best to be open and honest and out in all of the things, so I can be a resource person. Any other questions, things that don't make sense? Yes?
Comment, I wanted to expand on what Sue said. I'm from Manistee County, and I'm on the board of Manistee PFLAG, and there are a number of events that go on in Manistee County, both social support, and educational events, that people don't feel comfortable being out up here. Nobody knows you down in Manistee. And vice versa.
Yeah.
When there's more things happening up here, feel free to have people come up here and socialize and get to know and reduce that element of fear.
Yeah. Part of that is building relationships between the organizations and between leaders in the organizations.
Yeah.
And sorry to interrupt again, and thank you for bringing that up, Jim. We are partnering with Manistee PFLAG Group for events. We're partnering with Up North Pride for events. We're partnering with other LGBTQ groups in the area. So we are building the networks regionally. And one of the things that I think is in our long-term plan is to address some of the social issues here, like the housing issue for homeless LGBTQ people. So not like the greater housing issue that we have, which is also a thing.
Affordable.
Yeah, so putting together a list of regional resources where if you are thrown out of your house because you come out, here is a safe place that you can stay. That's not part of the shelter system where an LGBTQ kid is more at risk. So big long-term plans, but in the short term, we're working on mostly social events, stuff like this.
Yes.
Not that this makes a hell of a lot of difference, but I'm confused. Anatomically, what is LGBTQ?
Okay. Real quick.
What does it mean?
Okay, so this is an entire hour-long presentation.
Oh,
I'm not going to give the full hour-long presentation, but Cliff's Note version. You have gender and you have sexuality. Sexuality is who you want to have sexual relationships. See you later. Or romantic relationships. And that's where the lesbian, gay, bisexual, to a certain extent queer comes in. Lesbians are typically women who like women. Gay folks tend to be men who like men, although a lot of times young people especially like to use gay to mean all of the things. So just be prepared for that. And then bisexual means either, there's also pansexual, which means all of the things I'm okay with. Gender, you have people who are cisgender, which means that their sense of gender identity aligns with what they were assigned at birth. You were born, the doctor took a quick look at your genitals, said, this is a boy. You identify as a boy. Or the doctor took a quick look at your genitals, said, this is a girl. You identify as a girl. That's cisgender. Transgender can be any of the different identities that don't align with that determination at birth. So K is non-binary. Non-binary means that they do not identify with either male or female. They were assigned male at birth. For a non-binary person, what they were assigned at birth really doesn't matter. For a transgender man, that means you were assigned female at birth, you identify as a man. A transgender woman was assigned male at birth, identifies as a woman.
Thank you.
Yes. Is that good, Cliff's Notes? Are we all feeling good about that?
You can Google, to be honest with
Yeah.
you, I think there's a lot of language on words, so if you go online, there's a really nice, clear definition so that you'll understand. Like my father, who was pretty supportive, but when he heard people start talking about queer, because he was 90 some odd years old, he was freaking out. Why are they calling? Because of his generation.
And that was a word that was used as a slur.
Yeah, so I had to provide some education for him so he understood how that changed. So I think if you go online, you'll find a lot.
Yes.
To speak on an individual level, as a person in the LGBT community, I think to be able to know individuals safe or spaces safe, like just signage sometimes is all you need. When I walked into the first congregational church, you know, I saw that there was, like, the first thing I saw was, like, you know, a pride poster, and I was like, oh, my God. But I don't know anybody in this area, and I'm walking into a church wasn't always a safe space for me as a kid. So when I went to, because I'm from the Detroit area, and I moved up here, when I went to an interview for jobs, like, you know, walking in and seeing a human rights sticker, you know, campaign sticker, I know that they're a safe space. Knowing that, you know, the HR person that I was, you know, emailing with, that she had a pride thing on her Facebook thing. Like, it is like going into businesses and like having a pride sticker or the March sticker where all people are welcome is a sign that people and places are safe. So individually, that's what can happen to kind of bring people together.
And that's where that whole virtue signaling thing isn't a bad thing, it's a good thing.
Signal away.
Because then I know I am safe.
Thank you.
It's huge.
Huge. And isn't it true that I mean, to say everybody in the gay community is going to react to virtually signaling this way is a prejudice in and of itself. It's a classification. Just like, you know, I don't say that about, you know, well, my white friend Bob. Well, every white person thinks like Bob does, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's racism. It's everywhere.
And also one of the things that we need to be aware of as Christians in particular is that LGBTQ plus folks overwhelmingly experience the Christian community as being one that hates them. Virulently, violently. So they will not automatically trust you just because you have a pride flag. You have to go deeper than just having the pride flag. And that's part of that, like really working on your culture and the way that you interact with people, and it means that you have to earn trust. It's not won easily. But making space for that pain is also really important. You know, Kay and I, most of our friends are some kind of queer, and we are the only Christians they know that they are friends with, because they know A, we're part of the community, and B, that we are actively and very, very affirming. Does that mean any of them are going to become Christians anytime soon? Hell no. Because there's too many layers, right?
Yeah.
Too many layers of hate. But that doesn't change our posture. So understand that, just having the pride flag isn't necessarily going to mean that people are going to trust you, especially if you're a church. But it's a good first step.
On that note, I think I speak for many of us in the room when I say I need a Free Church Lady Hugs t-shirt. Where can I get that?
I can email you the image file for that. And hey, there's Bonfire as a resource for fundraising. may be helpful for, voila. Because you can upload image files to Bonfire, they'll print off t-shirts, and then you get a copy.
I have a church lady who does that.
Yes.
And we're very fortunate, St. Philip's has, St. Philip's has an outreach budget, and so far we have not done any fundraising, and our costs have been relatively low. Thank you to the outreach committee for supporting our bagels and cheese and stuff.
Yes, thank you, delicious. Any other questions, comments, concerns, wonderings?
I might add one last thing. Like, if you're emailing with somebody and you want to see friends, put your pronouns in your signature, because that means you taking the time to like even consider pronouns, and that's a step in the right direction.
That's a small virtue signal that can also make a big difference in the context in which you are not face to face with someone.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.